We're at the Fresh Air Center here in Bonn, and week one just came to a close. I'm here with Paul Horsman, who's the campaigns director for the Global Campaign for Climate Action. How are you doing, Paul?
Oh, a little tired after the first week, but I think we're doing all right.
Great. So what happened the first week in Bonn? Can you give us an overview?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things happening here in Bonn, but there were two key issues that came up for discussion this week. One is a discussion or a negotiation about the rules that are going to be made that cover the emissions from forestry and from land use. In policy circles, this is called LULUCF, which is it's an acronym that stands for Land Use and Land Use Change and Forestry. But essentially what they're trying to do here is trying to negotiate how to measure and control the emissions from forests, and to put it simply. The difficulty that we're facing here is that rich developing countries, or some rich developing countries, are actually proposing and supporting loopholes in the rules which would actually allow them to increase emissions from logging and also to not tell anybody or to hide those emissions. Now, that's an unacceptable loophole. There are two key problems here. One is that, the Climate Convention is geared towards trying to reduce emissions and to protect forests and other ecosystems that can absorb the carbon from the atmosphere, that act as carbon sinks. And these loopholes go totally contrary to that. The other important point here is that sends completely the wrong signal to developing countries who themselves have forests. We're encouraging developing countries to sign on to reduce their emissions, and there's a hypocrisy here on behalf of these industrialized countries that simply want to get these rules which will enable them to increase emissions. We want the loopholes to be closed, and in fact just recently, almost in the sort of last hours of this week, the African countries have actually noted that these loopholes must be closed. So, the signal is being very, very clear that, the rich industrialized countries must close these loopholes. They must commit themselves to rules which will cut emissions and protect the forests, which are, after all, a place that will help us from the climate. The second important issue that's come up this week is really what's called here the gigaton gap. Now, that's just a fancy term for saying that what we have committed to, or what the governments have committed to in terms of their emission cuts, and what is needed to protect the climate, there's a big gap between the two. So the science is telling us that we need to keep to at least, at the maximum, 2 degrees centigrade temperature rise above pre-industrial levels. Now, there are some countries who actually say 1.5 is their survival level, such as some of the low-lying areas. So we have this 1.5, 2 degrees sort of maximum, and it's a temperature target that has been identified at Copenhagen. But the commitments that countries have made actually will take us well over 3 degrees C. So there's a gap between where we want to be and what they have committed to. And what we are saying, there's two things. The first thing is, rather like people who are trying to cure themselves from addiction to alcohol, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge the problem. And so we're telling countries that they need to acknowledge that there is a serious gap between what they have stated they want to do and what science is telling us we need to do and what they're committed to. Once they've acknowledged the gap, of course, the most important thing here is they have to close the gap. So we need to get on the track where seriously deep emission cuts are committed to get us down to the possibility of keeping below 2 degrees C. So we have a long way to go to close that gap.
So today the U.S. delegation was shamed by NGOs, by CAN International, they gave them a Fossil of the Day award, which is pretty ironic considering that Barack Obama just gave a great speech last week where he committed to breaking the U.S. Our addiction to fossil fuels. So where do you think the disconnect is here?
Well, there's a serious disconnect within U.S. policy. On the one hand, we very much welcome President Obama saying that we need to move to clean energy and so on, but the imperative behind him making that statement is the fact that there is a huge oil spill happening as we speak here in the Gulf of Mexico, with oil washing up on the Louisiana, on the southern coast of the United States, horrific pictures of the catastrophe that is being played out on the south coast. And what that demonstrates is that our reliance on fossil fuels, in this case oil, but our reliance on oil is creating serious local damage. There's no question about the damage that is being caused by this spill, as the oil is still hemorrhaging from the seabed over a mile deep and 60 miles offshore. Now, that's a manifestation, if you like, or an indication of one of the more obvious examples of the price being paid for society relying on oil. The other one, you can't see that much, but certainly many people around the world are feeling the victim of it, which is climate change. And oil is responsible for over 40% of the carbon going into the atmosphere from the use of fossil fuels. So it is very clear that there is a clear message which answers both these problems, the local problem in Louisiana and the global problem of climate change, which is that we have to shift away from reliance on fossil fuels as a source of primary energy. We need to move to clean energy that will protect the marine life and the bird life of our coastline. It will also protect the climate.
So what do we need to see happen in Bonn next week?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things that we would like to see. What we want to see is some serious negotiations about the reality that we are in. We are in a world in the grip of climate change. And that has to be acknowledged. And in order to try to bring the rate of climate change down, to actually bring it under some kind of control, we need the negotiators to seriously start thinking about deep cuts in emissions to make it what we'll call a fair and ambitious and a legally binding treaty. This is what we wanted in Copenhagen. We didn't get it. This negotiation session here needs to put us back on the track of moving towards that fair deal, a deal that is fair to people around the world, an ambitious deal which has seriously deep targets that we can aim for, but and as well a legally binding deal. And we need to get on to that track in order to move us along there. We have a long way to go to get there, but some progress can be made here. And just as a final thought, President Obama said in response to this bill that he will work with anybody in order to fix this problem. Now, I would suggest that he needs to work with his negotiators here in Bonn to make those deep cuts in emissions so that we can move from relying on fossil fuels towards clean energies, which is going to protect the climate and protect our coastline.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.